Oh, baby, do we have ourselves a breakdown to get into, Mets fans? How we doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, getting into all the latest news and rumblings throughout the entire course of the offseason here in WardyNYM. And today, in our October 23rd edition, at the time of this video first dropping, we're going to start off today's discussion by getting into the new news. That is that the Mets may have, in fact, found their latest hire for hitting coach to pair with their internal promotion there and Jeff Albert. We know plenty about Jeff, the Mets hitting director that has been essentially promoted over the past week or so, but we're going to break down today the external hire the Mets are on the cusp of potentially making happen. Why a lot of fans are more than likely going to love this, including myself. Who exactly is this individual? Where does this reporting stem from? And then from there, we're going to get into the latest signing for the New York Mets as a surprise to absolutely everybody, for being honest. They're bringing back, yes, you guessed it, Southpaw Dickie Lovelady, Richard Lovelady, if we're going to go by the full name here. We're going to break down Lovelady, what he did or didn't do for the Mets this past season, why you should not lose sleep over in the slightest on this being one of the latest acquisitions by David Stearns, and ultimately how much more work the Mets and Stearns need to do for this bullpen throughout the entire course of the offseason. From there, we're going to talk about offensive options for this Mets team, because Yandy Diaz may very well find himself in Flushing, Queens for 2026. How could that be? We'll get into that exact reporting, where it stems from, the Mets' level of interest that we know to this point, and ultimately the pros and cons that come with the first base, third base DH option in Yandy, who's entering his age 34 season, and of course the New York Yankees, the Bronx Bombers. You know how everyone had their you-know-what's in a twist a year ago about Juan Soto landing with the New York Mets? Well, according to, yes, reports out of John Heyman of the New York Post today, is that the Yankees are in fact eyeing and like one Pete Alonso. So we'll expand more on that to say, should we react to this at all? Should we take it with a grain of salt, or should we say, oh my God, the New York Yankees are landing the polar bear? We're going to get into all that, I promise everybody. All I ask is that you hit that like and subscribe on your way in, as it's a fantastic way to support the platform, and let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis in the comments down below to everything that we have to break down today. And as always, shout out to our amazing sponsors that make every single show here happen, that being at SeatGeek, that has you covered for all of your ticketing needs. They have over 70,000 active events to choose from. They are the #1 rated ticketing app in the game today for a reason. So whether it's NBA season, as my New York Knicks, and maybe your Knicks as well, had a big dub this past night. No heart, no Mitch, no problem for that Knicks team. Whether it's NHL season, whether it's NFL season, whether it's concert shows, comedy shows, anything in the ticketing space, our great friends at SeatGeek have you covered. Utilize my promo code, link down below in the description, Wardy10, because you're going to get 10% off your next ticket purchase. And also head over to mantasleep.com and use my promo code Wardy, W-A-R-D-Y, because you're going to get 10% off the best sleep masks in the game today. Thank you guys so much for hearing me out and coming to my little TED Talk. Now, without further ado, let's get into all this initial reporting, and let's begin today, everybody, with what has come out that we have seen over the past couple days. In case you guys do not know, let me enlighten you, because this one I'm actually pretty excited about. Probably way too excited over a potential hitting coach hire, but there's good reason once you break down this young man's resume, and that is going to be, yes, Troy Snitker of the Houston Astros, formerly of the Houston Astros. In case you guys are unaware, yes, this is, yes, you guessed it, Atlanta Braves manager Brian Snitker's son. That is correct. So naturally, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest. I don't like the idea of Braves manager's son being hired by the New York Mets. I mean, that's at least how some of you guys are going to act in the comments down below. If it's regarding a rival team in any which way, shape, or form, we have a problem with it, even if they make sense for the team. Even if it's just based on nepotism, that's it, we got an issue. I'm here to tell you that Troy Snitker, yes, you can make the argument that he was a bit of a nepo baby to get to where he's gotten this point, but there is no denying that he has deserved the right to be here, and then some, as he has quite literally been one of the better hitting coaches in Major League Baseball that we have seen over the past 7 seasons. Now, I know you might say to yourself, Wardy, well, if this guy was so all well and good, why is he available for the Mets to hire him? Great question. There's a simple answer to this, and it's quite literally directly in line with what the Mets did with Jeremy Hefner and some other coaches that maybe there was questions as to if the Mets should really part ways with them or not. I know there was a strong contingent of Mets fans that hated the idea of parting ways with Jeremy Hefner after some of the great work that he did over the years in the Mets pitching lab, as well as obviously just being our pitching coach. Now, according to reports to the New York Post and others, Steve Cohen was going to be going scorched earth. He was pissed off, rightfully so, as the year came to an end. So the Mets were inevitably going to be cleaning house with the coaching staff outside of Mendoza if they were not going to part with Mendy themselves. That way they can put in proper hires that make most sense for Mendy, but also the other respective aspects of the staff, and obviously Steve Cohen, David Stearns down. Now, Snitker was so fascinating about him is that the sole reason as to why this man was fired by Houston Astros is the same reason why a good chunk of the Astros staff was parted with this past year. It's because they didn't make playoffs for the first time since 2016. So even though the Astros had injuries galore, even though they had some massive question marks with their roster throughout the course of the year, they're naturally going to part ways with guys who have just been here, grizzled veterans for a while, even if they haven't done bad, because they want new blood and they want a new voice in that locker room and clubhouse. And that makes sense. Everyone's voice gets stale after a while. And in the case of Troy Snitker, he didn't necessarily do anything inherently wrong. And let me tell you just how brilliant this guy was with the Houston Astros. And I'm loving the former Houston Astros hires to the Mets because they work. You know, for those that are unaware, David Stearns actually began his front office tenure as an assistant GM for the Astros in the mid-2010s before he went on to do all the great work he did with Milwaukee before now being with the New York Mets. Chris Gross, who the Mets hired a year ago as their VP there of scouting, he was coming over from the Astros organization, where during that time, the Astros were quite literally the best team in baseball over a decade span of churning out drafted talent to hit the major leagues. Literally, Astros were at number one, and the Mets were literally at the very bottom, the worst in the league. Chris Gross has done wonders his first year plus in this Mets organization. Love the hire. I'm loving the idea of another Houston Astro because Troy Snitker, across his 7 years as hitting coach for the Houston Astros, the Astros have not been any lower than 8th per Fangraphs across Major League Baseball and collective offense when evaluating WAR. That's a pretty big deal. And the only time that they've been lower than 8th has been 2025, where their offense was still just above league average at right around 13th. And on the WRC Plus was smack dab on league average at 100, which was 15th, which was literally right in the middle of baseball. And in case you guys don't know what WRC Plus means, which is weighted runs created plus, what it means is on a scale out of 100 per Fangraphs, or OPS Plus, which is essentially the same thing for Baseball Reference, 2 different sites you can use for all your baseball information. If you're above 100, you're above league average as a batter or as a collective group of an offense. If you're below 100, you're below league average, same thing for a collective offense. So the Astros have been league average or better every single year under Troy Snitker, leading to his departure this year because they did not make postseason for the first time since 2016. However, in the 2019 and 2020 seasons, separate from the cheating scandal, mind you, this Astros team ranked first in Major League Baseball in their offense. They've also ranked back-to-back years 6th in offense that we've seen after the 2021 season. So the point is that Troy Snitker has turned out a really good offense more often than not, pretty much every single year for the Houston Astros. And now that he is available as essentially a coaching free agent, he's a hot commodity. Trust me when I say that the Mets are not the only teams that have interest in Troy Snitker. But according to the reports initially dropped from Joel Sherman of the New York Post over this past day, he did state that according to a source of his, that Snitker is right at the top of the priority list for the New York Mets and hires. And this makes sense, and here's why. What are the Astros known for outside the cheating scandal? They're known for fantastic scouting, player development, and really getting the best out of their players. And they do that by utilizing a lot of advanced information that we've seen them to their benefit or to their demise when looking at the scandal, but when looking at their pitching and their offense. They're so analytically minded in the best way possible. All the recent hires the Mets just made, and Kai Correa for their bench, as well as the other aspects that they have recently done, are all more analytically driven people, so they are more up with the times of today's game. Snitker falls directly in that category, understands the newfound information, and Jeff Albert, who has been the hitting director of the Mets organization, but more so in the farm that we've seen over the past couple of years, will now get a chance to not only showcase his ability as someone who's really amplifying bat speed as well as lifting and driving baseballs, all things the Mets have not been proficient in and need to be better at moving forward on a consistent basis. Snitker can help in a large degree. And what do the Mets need more than anything with their hitting coaches? They need a cohesiveness of 2 people on the same page versus 2 people forced to be on the same page, the way that was the case with Jeremy Barnes and Eric Chavez. This is why Troy Snitker is such a hot commodity for the Mets. It's not just the fantastic track record he's had the past 7 years with the Houston Astros as their hitting coach. It's also the fact that he is very much in the mindset and understands the processes of what David Stearns, Jeff Albert, and everyone else in company plans to bestow upon this offense for 2026 and moving forward. You want compatibility. You want people that are not going to shy away from the numbers. The way that Eric Chavez on his high horse was like, I'm not a numbers guy, basically. I'm like, listen, You can be an old head all you want and not be in favor of the numbers. And I'm not here to say that analytics is everything, because that is far from the truth. We have seen in real time the Mets be too analytical with their lineup decisions, among others, and it's hurt them. It is not perfect. We've seen that with the Tampa Bay Rays famously pulling Kevin Cash, saying, all right, Blake Snell, we're taking out of the ball game in the 2020 World Series. They go on to lose that World Series, and now Snell's on the cusp of winning a World Series with a team that actually understands how to spend big dollars and utilize the numbers, i.e., this current present-day LA Dodger club. And the Mets want to get anywhere to be like the Dodgers and to be like the Astros of the past, which is really good teams for long periods of time. These are the kind of hires that help set themselves up greatly to put themselves in said position. So no, would I have been gassing up whoever the Mets interviewed? Not at all. The reason why I'm so excited about the idea of the Mets landing Troy Snitker, should these interviews have went well, because they just interviewed him essentially, and I'd imagine this will be a multi-round process, but still, you have to be intrigued by this, because there's quite literally nothing on paper when you look at his resume to say that, oh, this is a bad idea of a hire. All I see is plus, 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 plus. Extensive work with the Astros, World Series champ with the Astros, separate from the Cheen scandal, mind you. He beat the Philadelphia Phillies in real time without the scandal as their hitting coach a couple years ago in the World Series. That is all I need to see, okay? As well as how great aspects of that core group year after year has been for this Astros team. Yes, I understand they play in a batter's park. So when you have the benefit of having balls fly in Houston the way that they maybe won't fly in Citi Field after the year, I can understand that rifle maybe if you want to throw a criticism or a counter or just say, hey, it's far from perfect when you bear in mind the benefit that you had by being in that ballpark half a year. I'm not denying that. All I'm here to say is this is something that reaches a moot point when you understand how important this kind of hire will be for the Mets, to have two like-minded people that are going to feed off of each other, understand the numbers, and actually look at, analytics, look at advanced metrics, and not look like a deer in headlights the way that Eric Chavez is still currently doing. So for all those reasons, I'm intrigued by Troy Snitker and what he can provide to this New York Mets team. And he not only has connections to David Stearns, going back to Stearns' obviously rapport and connection during his time as assistant GM for the Astros, but there's also ties currently as well with that Mets hitting director that will essentially be our main hitting coach, and one Jeff Albert. So the pre-existing relationship and connections have already been there to a degree. Now it's just about hammering out details and why exactly this man makes most sense for hitting coach. And if the Mets decide to go in a different route and to a different hire, that's okay. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. All I'm going to say is I'm wondering why. Is it because Troy was underwhelmed after the interview process and much rather be hired elsewhere? Or is it because the Mets found someone that checks off even more boxes at a greater degree than Troy Snitker? Either way, we should be finding out sooner rather than later. Usually how the offseason works is it'll kind of be like out of the blue. Like the Kai Correa hire, as well as the other coaching hires the Mets have done of recent there. That really did kind of come out of the blue. Like, we weren't expecting it then. I was expecting most of these things to happen once playoffs were done, once the Mets interviewed maybe some people on expiring contracts, cough, cough, Kevin Lawn, Philadelphia Phillies, if you know, you know, for when their playoff run is actually done and when the offseason is officially here once the World Series passed. The Mets are not moving at that pace because they know they can't. And they know they need to be proactive in what's going to be a massive year for them, and not only to figure out the future of Pete Alonso, the future of the rotation, and other aspects of this roster for 2026 and moving forward. So Mets fans, let me know your thoughts on Troy Snitker, if you're for or against him after everything that I just relayed to each and every one of you. And like I said, there's one final note I have to make on him. It's the fact that I actually like the fact that he is Brian Snitker's son, and here's why. It is never a bad thing to have someone be embedded in the game since birth the way that Troy has. And we have seen in real time over the past 7 years how someone like him has thrived as a top 8 offense and twice number 1 in baseball over his 7-year span up until 2025, where they were still league average. The Astros offense has never been bad for an extended period of time with Troy Snitker as their hitting coach. That's basically what I'm trying to tell you. So his track record speaks for itself, and I can only imagine the great information that he's learned and obviously developed because of his father over the years, as his father was a longtime manager for the Atlanta Braves and has been around the game for literally ever. That usually bodes well as long as you see the success. Sometimes when you see Nepo kid situations, it's not ideal, where they don't have the track record, they just get put in positions right away, and they don't thrive. We can see that for other people in other organizations, sure, but that most certainly does not hold true here with Troy Snitker. So he deserves his flowers, a hot commodity, and I promise you, if the Mets do not hire this man, someone else will, and they will be reaping the benefits of adding him in real time soon enough. So now, guys, to go on from Troy Snicker, let's get on to more here in Mets land real quick, okay? Because let's get on to some other really, really interesting reporting that we have seen. And let's begin here with the following. We're not going completely with my guy Yandy yet, because instead we're going to begin right here, right now. The Yankees and Hal Steinbrenner reportedly like Pete Alonso, according to John Heyman, okay? Let's make something abundantly clear. It's from John Heyman, talking about Pete Alonso. What is John Heyman tasked to do this offseason? The same way that I am for the most part. That is to figure out things to talk about with Pete Alonso every single week. It's quite literally his job. As someone who's a contributor with the New York Post, I understand how these things operate. I'm not at all here to discredit or say that John did anything inherently wrong, but people are going to run with nothing and make it something this time of year. It's always going to be the case. Just the fact that the Yankees' name was mentioned is what's driving those clicks. And John, I'm sure, is smiling and happy about. And I don't think John said anything that was wrong here whatsoever. But what I do know is that John Heyman is also famously one who has a good connection with Scott Boras. One way or another, he does have a strong connection with him. And if him breaking the news of Juan Soto's deal wasn't evident of exactly that, I'm not exactly sure what is. In case you guys are unaware, Scott Boras reps Juan Soto. You remember when the Mets signed him? I know I do. So the point is that we're going to be seeing these kind of, crosstown rival feuds, especially in the case of Heyman, who literally his job is to report strictly on the Mets and the Yankees more than any other team in Major League Baseball. John is actually more the Mets guy with the Post than Sherman, from what I've noticed, just evaluating both. They both talk about both teams a lot, but John does a lot of benefit of the doubt regarding Mets reports, as Sherman does a lot with the Yankees. And we see them with their show that they do for the New York Post and their podcast, and it's a great job and all that stuff. But the point stands here. For this to come out, I think is far more on basically kind of being told that this is a good idea to put out there for the sake of the market and the rumblings than it is anything else, okay? Because let's just get into the obvious factors. Pardon my French here. No shit, the Yankees like Pete Alonso. Almost every single team in Major League Baseball likes Pete Alonso. The problem, liking a player and adding a player, believe it or not, are two completely different things. And for Pete Alonso as a fit for the New York Yankees, that would require obviously not bringing back Paul Goldschmidt, not bringing back Cody Bellinger, and bringing in someone that's going to probably be the worst defensive third baseman for you should you have him at first base to begin next season. I don't see that as an exaggeration. Alonso was literally the worst defender in baseball last year at first base. That's a statistical fact. 32 out of 32, he was dog water. He was also horrendous when looking at outs above average. Alonso's actually only had one good defensive season in his entire career, where he was 45th in outs above average per Baseball Savant. And you want to know what season that was? The season that no one cares about because the Mets did nothing, and that was 2023. Interesting. In a year where there wasn't much expectation as you were sellers at the deadline, we somehow, some way get the far and away the most proficient defensive year for Pete Alonso. Sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't, because Alonso, while he might not be good in certain pressure cooker situations, has also shown his ability to be fantastic in others, i.e. wild card last year, a playoff run from there, and honestly, what was a very respectable year for Pete Alonso. In case you guys did not look at his Savant numbers, these were Alonso's offensive numbers this year. Actually, the best since he's arrived in the league when looking at all the way from XWOBA down to bat speed. I mean, he's pretty much one of the most elite hitters in that category. He's right around league average from squared up percentage to chase percentage to whip percentage. There's a lot of different things here about Alonso and the whip percentage, you name it, that are encouraging. K percentage, 40th percentile, like these are not bad numbers for a guy who swings and misses as much as he does. Walk percentage was above league average last year for Alonso. But this is where we have the issue. It's that 2 percentile and outs above average. We go back last season, he was just as bad. 3rd percentile. For context, 100 means you're the best, 0 means you're the worst. 2023, just out of nowhere, out of the blue, 45th. It doesn't make sense for Alonso. As you can see, his offense has definitely been up, down, kind of when looking at these metrics a little bit. But this past season, he was elite. He really was. Alonso put up a very good offensive year, all things considered. We know that. But even having said that, is it really in the best interest for the New York Yankees to sign a Pete Alonso? No, it isn't. Is it really in the best interest for the New York Yankees to have multiple inflated contracts of big right-handed hitting power bats and not just Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, but to throw Alonso in that mix? I mean, Alonso would thrive at Yankee Stadium. I know he would. And is this their way of trying to get back at the Mets for Juan Soto? Sure. I mean, if I'm being completely honest with you, even if that happened, I would be upset to see Alonso be a New York Yankee, but I would still appreciate Juan Soto being a Met more. if that makes sense. And I know some fans may not love to hear that, but I care most about winning, and Juan Soto puts the Mets in the best position to win over Pete Alonso every single day of the week. Every single statistic will tell you exactly why that will continue to be the case. And then you add in the fact that, oh yeah, Juan Soto won a World Series pretty much his first year in the league, where he himself was a massive X factor as the Bryce Harper replacement. Kind of a big deal, if you ask me, right? On a pace, at a Hall of Fame pace, doing things that only Barry Bonds has essentially done. I mean, he's clearly doing something right, Soto. So not to lump them together, but that's just my point. Alonso's someone I do not at all foresee the New York Mets to be partying with. I'll be very surprised if they do, for the sake of him going to the Yankees. Could I see Alonso not being a New York Met next year? Absolutely. I think there's actually a world where that becomes a reality here. But should that be the case, until we see it to believe it, I'm not anticipating Pete Alonso to go to the crosstown rival in the New York Yankees, barring changes. And should it happen, we'll talk about them. But right now, I think this is honestly just more of a discussion to stir the pot, get Mets fans a little freaked out, get Yankees fans both freaked out and enticed and confused all at the same time, because it's that time of year. The World Series begins tomorrow, October 24th, the time of this video dropping. There aren't a lot of news going on in Mets land and Yankee land right now. Otherwise, we're not even at the point of really talking about qualifying offers. We're not talking about tendering versus not tendering guys all that much. We're still very premature with all that stuff before the offseason really begins. So what I would say, everybody, if you're asking for my honest opinion as someone who covers the Mets every single day and has under Steve Cohen's tenure as owner, take this with a grain of salt regarding the reporting on Pete Alonso. A lot of teams like Alonso, but until we see some of the significance come out of that, you shouldn't take it as anything significant, if that makes sense. But going on, last but most certainly not least, let's get into our final topic today. And this has everything to do with Mets potentially trading for Yandy Diaz. Yes, look at this, everybody. Breaking down the Mets' first base conundrum. If not Pete Alonso, then who? Now, something I found interesting from DeComo here is that he, one, did not bother to make mention of Kazuma Okamoto, who very well could be the best first base replacement for Alonso this offseason, potentially for the Mets. He's quite literally one of the best bat fits for this team and defensively. I think Anthony not making note of that has more to do with Anthony's lack of knowledge on the player than it is anything else, because he was just announced to be posted this past day. And I don't say that as a slight to Anthony. I just say that for people that are maybe wondering, why didn't Nakomo mention this player? A lot of people are just starting to inform themselves on these MPB guys. You know, just because you've been a writer or reporter in the game for a while doesn't mean you're going to be an expert in all these different areas. And that's okay. All I'm saying is, once Okamoto is inevitably connected to the Mets, you guys understand why, because you watched my video on him as of yesterday at the time of it first dropping. Check it out after watching this one in case you guys haven't. But as Anthony went on to break down first base options that we've already done extensively on this platform and will continue to, there was one name that popped in this conversation, which was really interesting. And that was Yandy Diaz. And the reason why Yandy Diaz's name was brought up here was because of the fact that reportedly, according to sources familiar to the information, according to Anthony Como of the MLB.com, is that going back to this past season's trade deadline, just a couple months ago, the Mets were in active trade negotiation for one Yandy Diaz. And this is interesting for a multitude of reasons, because one, if the Mets pulled off this trade for Diaz, it would have been for him to play more third base in DH, because Alonso, you have him for DH. Now, first base rather. Now, as much as I love Alonso as a DH profile, if the Mets pull off a trade with Yandy this offseason, which I'm here to tell you very well could happen, and here's why. David Stearns has made more moves with the Tampa Bay Rays than any other team since he's become president for this club. And that is important, knowing how many teams shy away from making deals with the Rays typically, and how well, and even going back to the Billy Epler regime, how much the Mets have, for one reason or another, had an appetite to trade with these so-called scary Tampa Bay Rays when looking at lopsided trades. The Mets trade for Brooks Raley that we saw, that has worked out handsomely for them since then, because Sean Askew has yet to pan out as a viable reliever option for the Tampa Bay Rays, as funky and as nasty as he can be in the minor leagues. You look at since then what the Mets have done. Yes, the Jose Siri trade flopped tremendously, but for what the Mets gave up, you're not really losing any sleep over it, are you? Then you look at the other moves the Mets have made. What was another key move the Mets made in a trade 2024? That was by acquiring Phil Maton from the Rays after Maton had signed a contract there. Wasn't performing overly well in the first half. The Mets pick him up. He goes on a tremendous stretch of being dominant for 20 plus innings, and then he gets rocked after being utilized way too many times in postseason play of last year's run. Not last season, but last year's run. So that brings us to present day. Yandy Diaz, as you guys can see from the numbers down below, is a more than viable offensive weapon that can be utilized for this Mets offense in 2026 and beyond. But Yandy falls in an eerily similar category as Pete Alonso. As to what do they have in common? They can't defend to save their life. As you guys can see, Yandy Diaz is, let's just presume he's in the percentile here of like 15, 20% on his OAA. Still an upgrade over Alonso because Alonso's literally the worst in baseball, but also not defensively proficient. And if David Stearns is going to hold true to, I need to upgrade this team's defense next year, outside of potentially running it back with Alonso, Diaz doesn't make all that much sense as an Alonso replacement. But where he does make an abundance of sense is as your DH. What have the Mets not figured out at all the past number of years since DH has become universal? And that's what to do with it. These schmucks, and I'm calling out everybody, all right? I'm calling out Zach Scott. I'm calling out Billy Epler. I'm calling out Stearns at this point. Some things look good in theory, but they have not panned out. The Mets have tried this nonsense with platoon DH, and it hasn't worked. Has it brought more roster flexibility? Yes. But who cares about roster flexibility when you can't even get power out of the one position that you're supposed to get it out of? And yes, I know, the Mets were great at home run hitting this past year. It wasn't a lack of effort, nor was it an issue for them. But the point stands, if you have a universal DH, in my opinion, and I know I'm not the only one who feels this way, you want a slugger there. You want a guy who at minimum can give you 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 home runs here every single year. Okay? And while I understand the idea of roster flexibility, this and that, and all just this nonsense, what I really do understand is that Yandy Diaz makes so much sense if the Mets actually commit to a DH option as someone who can play first, who can play third, but not someone that you want to rely on there. That's the difference, all right? Mark Vientos is a DH through and through. So a world where you trade for Yandy Diaz more than likely means you part ways with Vientos separately, which makes sense. I don't see a world where the Mets would trade Vientos to the Rays as a corresponding move. That would kind of be crazy if it was like a one-for-one thing, because Yandy's a surefire guaranteed thing to what you're getting now, but Vientos, there's still a lot of potential if the Mets were to trade him in something like this. And Yandy has club control as a 2027 club option. He's not an immediate free agent at the end of the season or anything like that. So the Mets would dictate they want to run it back with him for more than a year or so. But in 150 games that we saw for Yandy Diaz this past season, I mean, you guys see it. I see it as well. There's a lot to like. There's a lot to like here. 79 runs scored, 25 home runs, 83 RBIs, 3 stolen bags, a 300 average, a 366 on base, a 42 slug, a 135 WRC plus, as well as an OPS. Let's do the math. 4, 5, 6, 7. We're looking at an OPS, in the 900s or so, or close to. That's not at all a bad thing if you're Yandy Diaz, even as you enter now your age 34 season, because he is 34 currently. So 35% above league average as a batter. Defensively, he's a liability, can be, we know this, but offensively, he still has plenty to give to you. So when we talk about where Yandy Diaz would make sense for this Mets team, it really would be, in my opinion, as your full-time DH. I just don't see how that wouldn't make sense for the Mets as a team who could certainly use an upgrade of consistency in that area. And the fact that Stearns was in active trade negotiation for him this past trade deadline tells you that the Mets already have an appetite for Yandy Diaz. And the Mets may actually have an appetite for Yandy Diaz as first base still. There's a world where Yandy Diaz is traded for as the Pete Alonso replacement, and the Mets say, you know what? You're not great at defense, but you're still not as much of a liability as Pete. And that's basically what we're looking to upgrade there. And offensively, Diaz is not going to provide as much home run power, but he should still be able to provide a level of offense for you that's going to honestly be more balanced. Let's be frank. Yandy Diaz has been unbelievably good over the years in runners in scoring position, 2-out situations at times. Obviously, the splits will fluctuate year by year, but the point stands, he's been very valuable for them. And Diaz has had 20 home runs or more in 2 of the past 3 seasons. Last year, he had 14 with 65 RBIs, but that was also in a year where the Rays weren't as good on paper and as deep as what we saw this season. Diaz will thrive with a deep lineup to be protecting him, and that's what he would have here with the New York Mets and Juan Soto, potentially Pete Alonso. If Diaz is your DH and Alonso at first, no one's complaining about that. At least I know I'm not. And then you add in Lindor, Soto, Nimmo, everyone else in company, you got yourself a very deep lineup there, a lineup that can do damage for you. So for Yandy Diaz, can a trade happen? Absolutely. And I think the Rays will continue to be fielding offers knowing he has that 2027 club option. They don't need to trade him, but the Rays always do this, right? They traded Randy Arozarena away. They traded Jose Siri away. They traded, there's just so many. They traded Isaac Paredes away when he was looking awesome for them offensively. Like, the Rays just do this. Even with their new ownership group, there's a world where they're not going to run it back with everyone that they currently have. And there's a world where they may covet more of a Brandon Lowe at second base, more than a Yandy Diaz, maybe because of age. It could honestly just be that more than anything. But what I do know is that does Yandy Diaz make sense for this Mets team as a DH fit and or at worst an Alonso replacement? Yeah, he does. And yes, he would be losing power if he was your Alonso replacement, no doubt about it. But with how great of a contact hitter he is, how much would he really be losing because of how well he puts the ball constantly in play? And ways Alonso, when he has his stretches of not looking good, Alonso will just look like a man who can't hit a beach ball for a week or two. And I know players go through ruts, but like Yandy Diaz has consistently been a 300 hitter pretty much his entire career. He's a career 290 hitter with a 372 on base and a 442 slug. Clearly he's doing something right. He's been right around the same league average as Pete Alonso. So for some context, in case you guys are unaware, Yandy Diaz rather, has a collective 131 WRC plus. So throughout his entire career, he's still been 30+% better than the average batter in baseball. Pete Alonso, you want to know what his career WRC plus is? 132. He is 0.1% better than basically Yandy Diaz. They're basically two peas in the pod when it comes to overall offensive value. They have been essentially the same every single year. And Alonso has had more lows of recent than even Diaz has in that actual value per WRC plus as well as WAR. Because Alonso was a 3.6 WAR player this past year because his defense is a liability. Yandy Diaz, even with his defensive woes, was still a 3 WAR player this past year. 2 seasons ago, he was a 5 WAR player and then a 4 WAR player. And I know naturally he's not going to get any better, but at the same time, in a deep lineup like this for the Mets, having, being rejuvenized, having more excitement to play for the first time in a while versus his Rays that obviously aren't going to go too far. I know the Mets don't have a lot of flex other than Steve Cohen's money, but point stands, I think Yandy Diaz and a nice change of scenery will continue to bode well too, especially if he's DH. Who cares about the age? As long as the bat is still there, that's what we care about. So Yandy Diaz, do I like him as the first base option? I don't love it. I think he'd be fine there, but I think it would be in the best interest if you bring back Alonso and if you trade it for Yandy Diaz as your DH option. So we will see should the Mets circle back in those trade talks with the Tampa Bay Rays. But the fact that they've had them already just a couple months ago is telling that things probably haven't changed all that much heading in the offseason to evaluate their interest level in one Yandy Diaz. So I'm definitely curious to hear from you guys in the comments on if you're for or against a Yandy Diaz trade and what you think it would take to land the coveted first base, DH, third base option. Obviously, you have to give to get here, and the Mets would have to give up some assets, but I don't think it would be assets to the point that would have every fan freaking out, oh my God, why do we do that for an aging Yandy Diaz? I think Yandy's resume speaks for itself on what he's been able to do. I mean, the fact that he was 63% above league average 2 seasons ago is nuts. And last year was his lowest since 2021, and he was still 20% above league average. All he needs to be is right around in line with his career norms, and he would be more than enough of value for this team moving forward. And that is what I think David Stearns' Mets team wants, is consistency more than anything. And Yandy most certainly provides exactly that on the offensive end. So now, guys, before we wrap up the show, because we got one final topic I got to talk about with each and every one of you. I know you're excited to talk about it. I know you're giddy to get into it. And we're going to have more topics regarding the Mets and miscellaneous topics that we'll be getting into in the coming days separately from this, including stuff on the prospect front as well as to more kind of what's going on around Citi Field. Fun topics for a different day, though, because I want to separate the two. Today here, let's get into the signing, the breaking news from the New York Mets themselves. In case you guys are living under a rock, let me enlighten you, because clearly the biggest news of the day, cue the sarcasm, and that is going to be, yes, you guessed it, everybody, the Mets are signing back on a major league contract. Richard Dickey Lovelady. Yeah, the same Dickey Lovelady that posted a 6.3 ERA in 8 games for the Mets this past year. That same Dickey Lovelady is the second official move by the Mets this offseason as the first official major league contract the Mets have thrown out to a player this offseason. Before everyone freaks out, please know this is how Stearns is always going to operate, okay? You're going to start small and then go big probably. We're probably going to see, I'd imagine, another 4 or 5 moves before anything of like truly big significance for Stearns and the Mets this offseason. Because last year, the Mets' first signing in the offseason was Chris Davinsky on a minor league deal, who was solid for the Mets in limited sample sizes this past year. Then it was a bunch of other smaller signings for the bullpen for the most part. You know, it didn't take them long to bring in the Brandon Waddell's coming over from the KBO and his teammate as well, and Jared Young for the offense. I remember doing my video on Jared Young signing as I was just walking around Manhattan on a rainy day, just randomly out of the blue, like it was yesterday. So do not expect these overly sexy signings for the Mets to begin the offseason. You have to understand every team is going to be adding for depth. That is all Dickie Lovelady is, okay? Yes, he has a major league contract, but it does not mean the Mets are going to keep that in place by the time we actually get to spring training, okay? The Mets just don't have anyone under contract for their bullpen right now, so you might as well throw him a major league deal, see what happens. Hopefully he does well for you in spring training. Can be an arm that you consider if he has to start the year in the minor league, should he accept that assignment, and then you move on from there. Dickie Lovelady is like an even lower upside Danny Young. I know I'm not doing a great job trying to sell him to you guys, because contrary to the belief of some of you who watch my content daily that think I constantly kiss the ass of David Stearns and the Mets and all the moves that they make, this is a prime example of the opposite. There's nothing to kiss. There's nothing to do. I love Dickie Lovelady because of his name, and for that reason only, quite literally. Outside of that, I could care less if that guy was ever a New York Met or not again. So he is. He's back. We'll see if he has at all a role for the Mets, but he'll just be one of an abundance of arms that David Stearns will acquire to compete for back-end spots of their bullpen, as well as hopefully adding more higher upside guys externally and internally. Bring back Yandy Diaz, obviously. Run it up with Dylan Ross, Ryan Lambert, high velo guys who can impact this bullpen as soon as next season, among others that are in-house on the farm right now in both AA and AAA. Even though Ross was technically called up right before the season ended there in Miami, he just didn't get a chance to pitch. And then we're cooking, okay? I do not at all believe that the Mets are setting up Dickie Lovelady to be our setup man for next season. But I would be lying to you if I didn't say that, technically speaking, Dickie Lovelady is one of the best pitchers the Mets have under contract for their bullpen next year. It's him, Huascar Brosban, Brooks Raley, who will be on a club option, meaning the Mets will most certainly be bringing him back. That's about that. You know, there really isn't anything else. So if you want to make the jokes about it, go ahead and do that. But that's all we could really do at this point in time. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a guy to bring back because he can eat innings for you, and that be that. Do we want more than innings eaters? Absolutely. Will they add more than just innings eaters? Absolutely, I promise. And when they do, who's going to be here to cover it? You guessed it, this guy here on the WardyNYM platform all off season long. But that's going to do it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. I do greatly appreciate it. And all I ask to each and every one of you is hit that like and subscribe on your way out. Thank you so much for the support. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below on all the topics that we broke down today. But most importantly, have a great day. Have a blessed day. Something that I don't say nearly enough. I am so grateful to be in the position that I am to cover the Mets every single day as someone who's a diehard fan of them, for better or for worse. And a lot of times it's been for worse under the Steve Cohen, or not a slight on Cohen, just 3 out of the first 5 years have been losing seasons. That's what I'm referring to. And I've covered every single game. Just know how much I appreciate every single one of you. And sincerely, thank you guys for keeping us afloat here to the degree that we have been as the top dog here in this Mets space, even in the days of the World Series about to be between the Toronto Blue Jays and the LA Dodgers. No, I appreciate and love you guys greatly, and I'll be here for you guys no matter what, covering all things Mets all year long. Until then, have a great one, folks. And as always, no matter what, let's go Mets. Peace out, everybody.